So with that, on that note, let me now request Hasina for her thoughts. She is the founder and managing director of Impulse Social Enterprises in Shillong. She is based in Shillong in Meghalaya, which is one of the states in Northeast India, a beautiful state. And Hasina has been working with a number of micro and small women entrepreneurs. In fact, she has got them together into an organization which is Impulse Social Enterprises. Now, after hearing all these speakers from Nepal, from Bangladesh, from Bhutan, Hasina, it would be great to hear your thoughts, not just on the challenges which are being faced by women entrepreneurs in Meghalaya and in adjoining states in Northeast India, not just on the impact of COVID on those entrepreneurs, but also on how you are looking at these challenges which have been emanated from COVID and turning them. What are your thoughts on turning them into opportunities? Over to you, Hasina, in about 10-15 minutes.
Thank you, Vipul Chatterjee. And it's been wonderful to be meeting virtually with all the other speakers who have been part of the CUTS International and the initiative that we've been doing on research. I know we are supposed to all meet together, but unfortunately, here we are on a virtual space. Before we get into the question, Vipul, that you've already put up, I just would like to first start with the opening of what I had mentioned on the research document for CUTS, the paper. India has invested almost US 3 billion over for the last 15 years to support state government to empower poor rural women through self-help group. These projects have supported 45 million poor women access skill, market, and business development services. Some of them have become successful entrepreneurs and inspiration for others. Now, taking it from a scheme point of view of what the government has done from the lens of government of India, I want to go deep back into the ground reality where our earlier speaker have also highlighted is going through border huts. Border huts has been emphasized in the last few years. And I think your earlier research report, Ground Information, has highlighted that the Northeast, sharing international borders, especially with Bangladesh, which is the longest border hut has been an emphasis to encourage women entrepreneurs, but most of them has been very much in the informal trade. Now, taking that during the lockdown and COVID, the informal trade could not function the way it used to function. So that indeed has brought down the local economy and the trade participation of women at the grassroots to zero, because there has been no emphasis on how that could be tackled. And most of these women are women who have much or less not participated in the formal trade per se, where technology could play a vital role for them, or where they would connect the supply chain to a different format. So that is something that if we have to look post-COVID, if this continue for a longer time, the government will really need to relook how border huts will operate, how women participation in the border huts can also tackle the issue of COVID, tackle the issue of social distancing while enhancing economic livelihood for them. So this is something which I really want to highlight, having work on the ground, especially with women. The other factor is that the previous findings, the previous research at multiple level, and my ground participation at all the border point, the border huts has not till today women friendly in terms of infrastructure. So if we have to look at the ground level of women participation, we need to make these infrastructure possible for women. I think the last time we all met in Kathmandu, the same conversation, I think Nazreen Appa will also agree, we discussed the same issue, that India-Bangladesh trade if the informal trade has to be from a gender equal perspective, then infrastructure has to be created. Simple infrastructure such as toilet facilities, resting facilities, where women needs those small access. That's some basic part if we're talking about informal trade. The second part is the informal trade when it comes to women from the 8 states of the Northeast with our neighboring country, either Bhutan or, we're looking at Myanmar. I know this talk today does not really cover Myanmar, but having worked in Myanmar for the last 12 years, we see that the Moreh border as well has a similar trend of the border participation of the informal trade by women. Infrastructure is a cut across all these border points that the government policy has not addressed till date. Policy has been created, but it has never looked it from the lens of equity, from the lens of having these support services that make their participation much more conducive for trade. The other factor that I want to bring forward is that if you look at from the Northeast perspective of women in the informal trade, indeed we have the highest of them. But they have just been a channel of bringing product from Southeast Asia people to the Northeast. So when I use the word bring products from the Southeast Asia, whether we're talking about fashion product, household product, interior product, so they mean like they're more like a channel. And this channel has also been participated by women entrepreneurs from the Northeast in taking forward to other parts of India, of all the clothes line, all the fashion line, all the infrastructure material, interior product, and so on. But no, support services to enhance local economy has been looked into it, because the Northeast is also very rich with agriculture, very rich with their biodiversity. That part, if you go back to our earlier speaker, I think the whole concept about climate change, biodiversity, looking at carbon, issue, then they need to have a balance of that. And COVID situation have seen very much that the women has more resilience, but we need to also encourage more food security under the local trade, so that the people living across the border will actually, even in the situation of supply chain breakup of the technology, there's a food security that will be an enhancement of this trade that can continue, because that's an important part from two aspects: the lens of gender, the lens of food security, the lens of biodiversity, the lens of local economy enhancement. So this is never being looked. I think let's just look at the Harshvardhan today, the policy that they was spoken yesterday on the 19th emphasized so much about foreign policy, but foreign policy is inadequate without looking into informal trade, which is highly participated by women. So we need to really see that convergence of these policy or review of existing policy, within the framework of foreign trade, within the framework of women entrepreneurship within our country, our neighboring country, the BBIN countries, will really need to really look to have a better dialogue. Because without a better dialogue, these initiatives of foreign trade are actually being implemented in isolation. So even if in the last 7 years of the work at multiple level, not just from a social entrepreneur, that look at social impact business for women in the Northeast, working with neighboring country, we have not been able to address simple basic infrastructure for women in the informal trade. So unless until we make that happen on the ground, how do we really look the next level of emphasizing women participation and their economy? The second part is that there has always been this gap that women have not moved from an informal trade, because to a formal trade when it comes to, export with our neighboring country. It has been more men-centric. It's because of paperwork. Too much of paperwork and documentation has shown that there has not been any kind of hub that was being spoken for many years, that creating documentation hub at the border to improve proper documentation processes to encourage women from informal trade to go into the formal trade, that itself has never been taken into a larger dialogue, a larger implementation level. So there has been this mismatch of schemes that is being given to women, but does not look into their participation that will encourage formal trade to the, informal trade to the formal trade. If we have to see women in terms of leadership role in the entrepreneurship space, then these has to be tackled. These has to be discussed much more widely. So these are certain aspect which is ground reality. No doubt, the strength of women in the informal trade has been a backbone of how their participation in the local economies, in their strengthening their families, earning their income, cannot be denied. It is very, very strong indeed, but we cannot isolate their participation in taking them to formal, bringing them to the space of dialogue where they play a vital role. So that is my experiences on the ground, experiencing through implementation of impulse social enterprise itself, and also the dialogue, and also being a researcher at different level and analyzing these aspects. Government at one end would discuss foreign policy but will never talk informal trade dimension. When we know that our neighboring countries that we are discussing today function more on informal trade. We talk about border huts, but we don't talk about infrastructure that is required to be taken forward to make informal trade for women more inclusive, as we are talking about inclusivity. So inclusivity cannot come where you say, here we are doing a trade, and then we dismiss the fact of infrastructure needs. Then we are talking about the reality today that all of us, I think our previous speaker from Bhutan as well, spoke very much about how COVID and how the country has responded to COVID. But now with the reopening, the factor about which product will be actually available in the informal trade, which whether we're going to talk about agriculture product, which is the need of the hour, food is the need of the hour. If that is the case, then we also have to see how we emphasize growth, right? Participation of women farmers, land rights issues have to be taken into consideration. If you look at the dimension of the Northeast, we have to look into customary laws and the land rights issues. If you're looking even at in the context of Nepal, the same situation comes into account, customary laws and their emphasis. If you're looking at Indo-Nepal, Kakarvita, for instance, is one of the biggest informal trade that has women from the 8 states of the Northeast participating very much in acquiring a channel of bringing these products to the Northeast itself. And we are consumer for Southeast Asia products. And these are women entrepreneurs who are the channel for it. But we have not created a plan that will actually help them improve their participation, improve their contribution, improve in taking them to the next level. With that, Vipul, I think we can open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I open the floor for discussion, you can also put down your thoughts in the chat box, questions, or observations, or comments. I'm glad, Hasina, that you have brought this Southeast Asian dimension to this discussion. We have been hearing that as part of our Neighborhood First, as well as Act East, that Manipur, particularly, is the state which is the link between India, South Asia, BBIN, and Southeast Asia. In theory, yes. At the same time, we keep hearing that the market is not there, the connectivity is not there, and therefore it is difficult to do trade. But it is interesting to note from your presentation in particular that Southeast Asian products are coming to Northeast in a big way. So if connectivity was not there, then how is that possible? That's the natural question which would come to my mind. It is right now it is coming informal way. So we need to look at how we can institutionalize some of these enabling factors which can help us to do more and more formal trade with Southeast Asian countries. I'm also glad that you have mentioned two very, very important points. One is that we cannot really talk about foreign policy by not looking at it from the point of view or angle of both formal and informal trade. This is something which our foreign secretary has spoken about the day before, not in that very clearly, I would say, but this is there, I know, in MES or Foreign Ministry's agenda. And we are definitely going to take forward this message to our Foreign Ministry and to our Donor Ministry, Department of Northeast Region, and going forward. And secondly, I think informal trade is a very, very important factor behind food security in this region, in the whole of Northeast and adjoining areas. And that is something which we need to recognize. So, in today's webinar, I think we have got a lot of food for thought, which will help us. For example, you gave the example of border huts. How can we make the infrastructure there more women friendly? This we have been talking about. Some improvements have taken place, much more improvement is required. So sometimes I see this disconnect between the capital cities and the local areas. And our role is to bridge that disconnect as much as possible. So with that, let me now open the floor, and including to other speakers. If you have any questions or clarification from other speakers, you are welcome to place them or ask them. Or otherwise, you can also raise your hand uh, to ask questions. The only thing is that time is limited. We have about 15 minutes for this question and answer. Anybody would like to kick off? Any questions? Or are you too fatigued? And the year is coming to an end, so I don't know whether there is going to be any question for today's webinar. I think it was very good in the sense that some of the things which we have found on the ground, they got we could test them, I mean, from your presentations, and we have also received a lot of ideas, food for thought for taking forward this agenda. I think my colleague Veena, you have any question?
No, actually, Nasreen ma'am is speaking. I think she is muted.
Unmute her.
Already unmuted.
Okay. Yes, Mrs. Nasreen, we can hear you. Yes. And there are some connectivity issues as well. Ravana, are you still there? Would you like to say something? If you want.
Should I say something, Bipul? I mean, if
Yes,
others
please.
can just
Yes,
join
please.
in. I think post-COVID, we really need to also emphasize that foreign policy takes, biodiversity, agroforestry into account if we have to really look it from the lens of gender participation, as we keep talking about. But for me, I would say gender equity is much of high value in terms of policy and real implementation. That we cannot look at the Northeast just as a recipient of product coming from Southeast Asia in terms of the formal and informal trade, but we rather could also be the hotspot for biodiversity, food security to our neighboring countries, because that's the richness that we should emphasize. I think if you're looking back at all the four multiple research that has already been reported, I think it's time for the government to have dialogue on them, to really look at the findings that is already there from the ground, rather than asking for opening of more border huts. I'm quite surprised with the fact that the states in the Northeast is asking for more border huts with Bangladesh, but they have not really resolved in terms of you know uh, requirement for needs of informal trade and women participation. Do we still need more border huts at the moment, or do we really need to strengthen the existing border huts? I
I think
visited maximum of the border huts. The emphasis of strengthening has not come into consideration in many of the meetings, whether we are talking at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I participated, before COVID. And I think right now they have more responsibility to look into it, you know.
I think
And
we
then,
need both.
yeah,
Yeah, there is a demand-driven agenda, and we have been doing a lot of field work on the ground. And every time we are seeing that people are demanding. But at the same time, you are right that we have to have good infrastructure in place. I mean, I'm not talking about huge infrastructure. We are talking about basic infrastructure which is women friendly. Uh, for example, lighting, toilets, water facilities, and things like that. Now, there is a question from our friend Jyotiraj Patra from Oxfam, Cambodia. His question is, in terms of addressing the infrastructure deficit in the border areas, are there any example of impact investment or from the private sector? So there is another question. It is very important from Saurabh Malhotra, that it is very important to look at the Eastern Himalayan greater region or greater Himalayan region in the eastern part as one transboundary region and plan sustainably in the value chains of biodiversity and trade. Important, absolutely, it is important. And then there is a question from Ramona Al Hamzwai from USAID, New Delhi Mission, that while emerging from COVID, what would be the one key activity to undertake as recommended by each of the panelists? So let me take this first and start with Hasina. That what would be that one key activity that you'd like to undertake by yourself or your organization, state government, central government, other bodies, uh, in order to mitigate the impact of COVID and also to convert challenge into opportunity. So let's begin with you, Hasina.
yeah, thank you, Vipul. I think for me, mitigating climate change and mitigating foreign trade relationship with our neighboring countries would mean that we address unsafe migration, we address the inbound migration to participate in local economy. With that, I believe very strongly that co-creation is a way where we emphasize, innovation that can help to mitigate the situation. And I think that
Mhm.
goes back to what Saurav has asked. But since Saurav is working very closely with us, people in the co-creation in the Eastern Himalayan, and has been working to put things together on the ground as we are opening up. I think, Saurav, if I may ask you to come on board and just maybe throw your light on why this co-creation is so critical, because we are all in the Eastern Himalayan belt, all our other speakers as well, it'll be great.
Yeah, so can we unmute him, Keval?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Hi, thanks a lot. Thank you, Hasina, for getting me on board, and thanks for unmuting and letting me speak. I just like to throw some light on the fact that, so if we look at the greater Eastern Himalayan region, and that is the area in focus in this webinar, this region has been a hotspot of not only biological diversity but also cultural diversity, and a lot of trade, both legal and illegal, across borders happening, and a lot of this trade has negative impacts on the region. What we've seen through a lot of our work is that it is actually the environment and degradation in the environment which is leading to unsafe migration, and the fact that it is the degradation of the environment which is leading to a reduction in farm-based livelihoods, a reduction in agricultural outputs, and thereby forcing people to migrate out from their home zones and migrate unsafely to areas, and also forcing illegal trade through zones, which has its own set of problems. What we are trying to do through this co-creation partnership is a focus on restoration transboundary, with a particular focus on the border regions, because if you look at deforestation data, a lot of the border regions, especially the India Myanmar border zones, India Bangladesh border zones, India Nepal border zones, India Bhutan border zones, also in the last many years, are some of the most highly degraded um, forests in the region. And it is from these areas that a lot of unsafe migration springs. So through this co-creation, we think that by tackling the environmental lens, by recreating forests, by actually revamping and enhancing farm outputs through agroforestry, by bringing biodiversity back, that you not only enhance people's livelihoods, you generate sustainability in food chains, which we've seen has been a massive help during COVID. A lot
Thank
of
you. Yeah.
the ground people have been able to go through stuff on COVID. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So so
Okay. Thank you.
looking at the environment in
Thank
this.
you, Saurabh. Thank you.
Thank you
So
very
going
much.
forward, as we further strengthen our partnership with EC Mode and other organizations, this is definitely which is something which we are going to work on, including in partnership with Impulse.